Welcome back to those conversations on the formula of Concord. We are on Article 4 on good works. And this is the one, Scott. This is the one everyone's been waiting for. Well, this one and then maybe the next two. This is
Yeah.
you're going to see that. You're going to
There's
see
one coming up that people have probably been waiting for.
Yeah, you're going to see the view number spike as people want to know. But good works, man. I mean, this is a big thing with Lutherans. I mean, Lutherans from the beginning were accused of just not believing that good works were necessary. Why bother? We're saved by grace. Forget it all. Guys,
matter of fact, Dan, that word necessary is a big deal in this particular article, my friend.
It is a big deal. Now, before we jump right into it, if you're just watching this video and you haven't liked or subscribed or rung the bell on YouTube, you need to do that so that you can be notified as we put these out. Still in the great quarantine of 2020, so you're gonna need
quarantine.
You're gonna need something to do, so you can watch these videos every day as we work through the formula of Concord. So we're doing 2 weeks worth. So all right, Scott, here we go. We're going good works. What is the controversy that we are addressing here? I mean, it's that the status controversial.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun one, and one of the reasons it's fun is because it's still going on today. you can wrap it up with the antinomian controversy, the against the law controversy, the third use of the law controversy, all those controversies that still are being argued about today. I would say that on the whole, you can first of all, anytime preachers of the gospel come in hard with the freedom won by Christ over sin, death, and the power of the devil, that freedom for the sinner, you will be accused of, that preacher will be accused of saying that good works don't matter, even if they don't say that. And this was the case then as well.
Yeah, I believe it was the Reformed. Reform. I don't know if he was a Presbyterian or an Anglican, but
I think he was an Anglican at one time, and then he left. Martin Lloyd-Jones.
Yeah, Martin Lloyd-Jones, I believe. He's the one that said, "Look, if you've never been as a preacher, if you've never been accused of being an antinomian, I mean, you've not preached the gospel. You're doing this thing wrong. If no one's ever made that accusation to you, then you must not have really gone hard with the gospel ever."
Yeah, and that's interesting. I like that actually. So how this comes about is I'm going to keep it as brief as possible, but sort of brief history lesson. Some people may remember that in 2017, we celebrated the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. So that was essentially celebrating in 1517, Luther nailing the 95 Theses to the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg. If you're real snotty, you say Wittenberg. And then we celebrate 500 years from that. But at this point in time, think of it this way. By the time they had gotten to 1530, so 13 years after that initial spark of Reformation, Lutherans were being accused of, by the time of the writing of the Augsburg Confession, Lutherans were in fact being accused of saying that good works don't matter at all. Melanchthon addresses that in the Augsburg Confession. He addresses it in the Apology, but this accusation persists. And if you know, even though it's been addressed very well in two confessional writings in 1530 and in 1531, I'd say Luther addresses it quite handily in his catechisms, which are late 1520s. And so this is something that we're accused of and that we deal with, but the accusation keeps coming. Now, this accusation particularly bugs Melanchthon. Melanchthon is a scholar and a humanist scholar, different meaning than in our day and age. It basically means he studied classical literature in the original languages. And but the people who were humanist scholars, especially in the northern part of the Holy Roman Empire, called Northern Humanists, were very concerned with piety. And that would understand that in the same way we would use that word. If you say that's a very pious man over there, you mean that he's a very trustworthy, he's upright, probably not committing a lot of sins that at least you see openly, and that type of thing. And so Northern Humanists are very concerned with piety, as is Melanchthon. And so this accusation that this thing that he's fighting so hard for, this evangelical faith, leads to impiety, really bugs him. And he begins to address it in his seminal works, which are called the Loci Communis Theologici, or the Common Topics of Theology. First, Protestant Systematic Theology, ever written, used to train pastors for 100 years, even after Melanchthon's death. And in one of those editions of 1535, he says, good works are necessary to salvation. He's got an in that. In Latin, it's an ut, in that or so that. Good works must flow from being saved or from receiving saving faith.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people freak out about this, right? So on the one side, you have sort of the Luther and the reformational evangelical monergists who say, God's doing all the work here. You can't say that your good works are necessary to salvation because that means that you've done something good that's contributed to your salvation.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there's somebody, we've heard his name already. His name's Amsdorf. He was a chaplain in Wittenberg for a while, Nicholas von Amsdorf. It says, he rears his head again. He says, not only are good works not necessary for salvation, but they're detrimental to salvation. And so in the opening lines of this article of the Formula of Concord, rather than just having the one side and then the corrective the other side, you're going to get that there's at least two sides that are saying the wrong thing here. You're going to get, first of all, there's a side that says good works are necessary to salvation, that it's impossible to save without good works, and that no one's ever been saved without good works. They don't name it. That's adaptations and or direct quotes from Melanchthon's 1535 Loci. And then there'll be another party, Amsdorf's party, which is contending that good works are so bad that you instinctively rely on them so much that they're detrimental to your salvation.
Now,
and then,
Scott, so in the way that Melanchthon originally wrote this, the way he originally penned this, because here, at least in the translation here that I'm working with, you have people, it says that the people are saying that good works are necessary for salvation. Now, unless I'm wrong, this is not exactly the way he phrased it. Like, saying that good works are necessary to salvation is not necessarily the same as saying for. So that good works necessarily follow to salvation means that this could be perceived as a fruit of salvation. For is a different thing.
Yeah, so I'd say either way, it's a bad line.
Right.
Yes. I don't like it either way. But when you read it in the context of the entire chapter in the Loci that Melanchthon sticks it in, it's he explains it time and time again. Not that you can rely on your good works as blah blah blah. He does the whole thing. In fact, again, I believe I've translated that. I believe the translation is up on 1517. If you want to link it or people want to go find it. I think I've translated the article on good works from the 1535 Loci that people could go read themselves and kind of get the whole context of what he's trying to say there. But the big point here is that even if you can sort of write a whole chapter and make that phrase understandable, if you have to do that, you should have picked a better phrase. You should have picked a better phrase. Yeah. So, and I think even people that love Melanchthon, any Melanchthon scholar worth his wit would say, not his best time here. Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting about it is as you come in, centuries later, I could sort of play devil's advocate for both of these statements where it's like, well, he's not saying that they can necessarily contribute, so they can make an apology for it. But at the same time, you're like, well, this statement that good works are injurious or actually are harmful to salvation, I actually can interpret that in a way too and say, well, actually, one of the, like, if you're trusting in them, they're like the absolute worst thing that you could have going on. I mean, our righteousness is extremely dangerous. And so if people think that that's like an outlandish phrase, and it probably is, and I think it is, but the great Lutheran theologian Bob Kolb wrote a great article on it in Renaissance and Reformation. Let me see, it's a long time ago. It was in 1980, but I read it.
Congratulations, Scott.
Yeah.
It's just called "Good Works Are Detrimental to Salvation," and he explains sort of the whole context of what Amsdorf's talking about there. Right. Yeah. And so what I like about the way this goes is that they have these two positions, and really what you're coming down, like for me anyway, is I'm like, I understand why someone would say either of these things, but I don't know that neither of these are helpful ways to say this. Yeah.
And what you find as you go through the various theses is they really are striving for balance between these points of view to try. I mean, because they do affirm as we go through that good works certainly and without doubt follow true faith. I mean, they will say that. I mean, it's not ambiguous.
No.
But at the same time, they don't want people to go to the point where they're using the language of it is necessary for salvation. That's the issue.
Yeah. So, and they do that. So they parse out sort of the philosophical implications of the word necessary, just a little bit farther down, which is helpful because in the formula, more than other confessional documents in the Book of Concord, you will see that philosophical language has made its way much more heavily into theological discourse by this time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of the controversies we have are over people using philosophical, usually specifically Aristotelian language to describe things and not having a common point of reference for what the definition of that thing is. You'll see that when we get into the functions or use of the law. We'll see that in functions and use. You'll see that we have already seen that in cause, how Melanchthon uses the Aristotelian causes and not just sort of a vernacular use. And you're seeing it here again in the word necessary. So the formulators go down and they say necessary can refer to a couple things. It can to the unchanging order of things which binds all people to be obedient to God. It can mean coercion and force to do good works. It can mean a couple of things. And then it goes through like the formulators are so good at, and they say, okay, let's clear the slate here. We've told you where the confusion is, and so as to not get you more confused by spending more time on the confusion, let's talk about the true teaching. And what you'll find in the true teaching is just, I think, a very biblical exposition of how the scriptures speak of the necessity of good works in the Christian life.
Yeah. That it will flow from the fact that you are a regenerate Christian. And yet also what's interesting here, if you go back to the third statement in the affirmative theses here, the 8th paragraph, it says, now I'm just thinking in contrast to the statement on original sin, you have this, it's corrupted every part of the human being. And yet it says this, we believe, teach, and confess also that all men, but those especially who are born again and renewed by the Holy Ghost, are bound to do good works.
Yeah.
So even as there's this acknowledgement, and this is where I think it's so biblical, that original sin is so corrupted, man, that it's corrupted every part of us. Even here they're saying, yeah, but even the fallen sinner is bound to do good works.
Yeah.
But especially more so the Christian.
You'll see things like that it's God's will, that it's God's ordinance that you do this. That God prescribes it in his word that you do these things. And I mean, it gets pretty specific. And even if you recall certain sections of the New Testament, even in Paul's epistles, some of that stuff actually gets pretty prescriptive. Do this, don't do that. This is the list of things that are required for this. And on it gets pretty prescriptive. For Paul in the New Testament, it often ends on is centered or rooted on this idea of leaving behind your former self, right? And living in the life that you now live in Christ, which is a little less prescriptive and a little more sort of, listen, you're a Christian, walk in Christ, but the thing that the formula does so well is take this the scriptural idea that that is not intuitive to us, that when you do something that God looks at and says it's good, he does that solely because you stand in Christ through faith alone. Faith alone is the mother, it says, and the source of the truly good and God-pleasing works. Faith alone. Which is helpful to the Christian, because the Christian will do good works and know that those good works are corrupted by their selfish motivations, their need for praise. The list goes on and on and on. And the formula comes and cleans the slate here and says, yeah, but those are still acceptable to God and pleasing to God because you stand in faith in Christ. God looks at those works and he deems them as good because of Christ.
One of the things I think is really important that I really like that they get on is in the affirmative statements, number 5, where they're getting ahead, like a little bit ahead of themselves. We're not talking about law and gospel yet, but you can tell that that's where we're going to head next.
They really want to.
So they sort of like,
they're like, we haven't defined these terms yet, but we're gonna.
Yes. But it's important because you're like, okay, got to do these good works. Well, where are they going to come from?
Yeah.
so that they necessarily flow from the someone becoming regenerate, where they come from, and they're so explicit that this is not this does not happen through coercion
Nope.
or the driving of the law,
Yep.
but of a voluntary spirit, because you are no more under the law but under grace.
This is so contrary to the way that our instincts go about this. We absolutely, and so much of our preaching reflects the opposite of this, that the way you get people to say, give more, the way you get people to serve better, to do more at the church, whatever, is by coercion, is by the driving of the law.
Yeah.
And there's multitude of ways that this is done.
Yeah.
Now this is something that we're still dealing with. People still, by and large, I would say, in the church, and Lutherans are not excluded from this, but like even if you confess that that's not the case, functionally, we act like it's the law that will create people's, they will create obedience, will create good works. Yeah. We at least functionally act that way.
Yeah. There's a couple of really important moves that the formula makes here. First of all, it's important to note that anytime the formula, even without naming it, sort of criticizes something that Melanchthon wrote, it usually comes back and says, yeah, but he wrote this, and this is pretty good, without saying it. So the formula does that here. You go a little bit further, it says both the Augsburg Confession and the Apology state that good works are necessary, and that we affirm that, right? Mm-hmm. So Melanchthon uses that word in the Augsburg and the Apology, saying that they are necessary, and these are confessional documents and scriptural in integrity, and we affirm that. Mm-hmm. But it goes on to say just what you said, Dan, that this necessary doesn't refer to compulsion, but rather to God's unchanging will that they be done, right? That is a great catch sense. And then beyond that, you get sort of an introductory peek into this idea of the Christian being at the same time saint and sinner a little bit further down, when he says you have to keep in mind the dual nature of the Christian, right?
Yeah.
Meaning that the Christian at the same time both holy saint and sinner.
Yeah, and here they refer to Romans 7, which is sort of like our go-to simul passage, right?
Yeah,
so
Romans 7 and Galatians 5. I think it's, I mean, so there are some, that would say, the Lutheran confessions never use the phrase simul, or it's not a big theme.
This drives me crazy, man.
Well, I mean, whether that's accurate or not, the fact is the theme is right here. I mean, it's undeniable.
It's everywhere.
Yeah. It's undeniable. It just runs through the course of sort of Lutheran thought about, especially when we talk about good works and we talk about freedom, that it's just there. And it's not, they purposely, as they're talking about the importance of good works, put this in to say, nevertheless, it's done through great weakness.
Yeah.
That's just another way of saying the simul.
I love it. And the formula in this article then goes on to say, you're in that you're a Christian, you're free, but don't mistake the idea that you're free for this idea that good works are optional, because they're not. And that type of thing confuses the heck out of us, because and especially in Americans, if we think we're free, that means we think all things are an option to us. And this isn't what this means in this sense. There's a specific set of things that you are free from, but this is not one of them. And the question is, how are you then motivated to do them? Well, the answer that you're going to get after they do some more clarification of what it means that they're necessary, the answer that you're going to get is that because you stand in faith, and the reminders of that are what prompt you on to do good works. You'll see this again in the discussion of the third function of the law. Whereas the third function of the law, not to jump too much, is instructive, but the formula acknowledges that when you do those things that are instructed, it's the gospel that motivates you to do them.
Well, one of the reasons that good works, you can state them as not optional, is because God promises that you'll do them, and then He is the one that's working through you to get them done. So they're not going to be optional, because it's the Spirit working through you, right? So it's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's what it means by they're necessary, in that they're connected to the immutable will of God.
Correct.
In changing desire of God for you to do them.
Yeah, your good works are prepared beforehand by God for you to walk in.
Yeah.
but God's the one who's prepared them. God's the
Yeah.
one who's put you on the path.
Yeah.
And most likely it'll happen in various sort of mundane vocational ways that you're not
That's
even
right.
conscious of. I mean,
Yeah.
think about right now. I mean, at our time, I just can't help but think about it. I talked to a buddy of mine at my church in the city who is working at Target right now, stocking shelves every day. And I said, "How you feeling?" Wanted to check up on him. And he said, "Man, I feel like a hero right now because I'm feeding the city." And it was like, yes, because what he was experiencing was the glory of his vocation being a Target worker, just stocking shelves at a
For the
time.
first time
Perhaps
experiencing
for the
it
first
mentally.
time. Yeah, that's right. But all of a sudden he's recognizing,
Yeah.
oh, this is the good works God's prepared beforehand for me to do, putting bread on the shelf so that New Yorkers can at least be fed.
Yeah, and I think this is important, Scott. Like before we wrap this thing up, to talk about this, about how maybe these good works are different than we would think they are, and largely vocational. If the great quarantine of 2020 has done any positive things, it's possibly made a whole lot of people appreciate truck drivers and grocery store workers and people doing regular stuff. And you're like, oh man, like, who's really important? The farmers and the truck driver. Man, that stuff is really important. Yeah, they don't get to quarantine up, man. I need you to go to work to serve
the people
me.
that are making currently in the United States that have been brought on board in this sort of Wartime Production Act to make ventilators and face masks, they're going to an assembly line. And in that vocation, they're serving God.
Yeah. These are the kinds of good works that God that the formula really is referencing. This is the kind of stuff that God is doing through his saints and is bound to happen.
Yeah. And that stocking those shelves and driving that truck didn't become a good work because you're in a time of crisis. It always was.
It always was. That's why I said perhaps for the first time experiencing it mentally.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, the last warning the formula gives, it very blatantly says, listen, do not connect this idea that that good works are necessary, because they are, but do not connect it to the article on justification. It specifically says, do not connect this to the article on justification. That this is where this becomes injurious, and this is what should be avoided, almost at all cost.
Yeah,
and we see the damage when it's not avoided.
Sure. Yeah, and what they really want to do is they want you to know that these good works, that they do not maintain faith and salvation in us. So they are not even, they're not even part. Okay, so we can say
they're not a means of grace.
Yeah, so we reject the idea that salvation comes about through good works. We also reject the idea that salvation is maintained through good works. Like neither of these things are true, because I think that's one of the real dangers that you have, is that people will come along and say, yeah. Like, of course, my good works didn't contribute to my salvation, but they start looking to those good works,
as evidence of their salvation.
Which is again taught all over the place. I mean, it's one of these ways that you'll hear preachers try to determine the quote unquote false convert from the true convert. How much fruit are you producing, sort of thing. Well, all it takes is one sensitive conscience to acknowledge, like, not enough.
Yeah. Well, that assumes several things. It assumes that it's your job to identify the fruit. It assumes that even if it were your job, that you'd be capable of identifying said fruit. It assumes that you can look into that person's heart and know which works were done good and which ones were done evil. It assumes all sorts of things that only God can do, and that only God promises that he can recognize. This whole thing is, what is God recognizing as a good work done in faith on account of Christ? And what is he seeing as good works done in faith on account of Christ? Apart from that, nothing is recognized by him as good.
It's one of my favorite parts about the parable of the sheep and the goats, that at the end of the parable, the goats think they're going to be rewarded for what they've done. And it's the sheep who are shocked that they've done anything. Like, when did we do this for you? The point is that we're probably not very aware of the kinds of good works that that are actually being produced in us and through us the vast majority of the time. And chances are, if you are aware of it, it probably doesn't qualify as much as you think.
Well, being that they are mundane and vocational, the ones that you, especially looking at somebody else, would identify, probably wouldn't be, like you said, the ones that qualify. You didn't see when that mom or dad changed a crappy diaper at 3 a.m. in the morning, and when they really didn't want to and they just wanted to go back to sleep, and had been 4 diapers that day because the kids got diarrhea or that evening and they're just sick of it, but they get up and they do it.
Yeah.
You know, you don't see that. That's something that we earthly fruit inspectors, that's a fruit we can never inspect because we're not there. We don't see it.
Yeah.
Normally when we're inspecting fruit, I think that we're inspecting, we're trying to gauge some level of personal holiness that someone has.
Yes.
So what we're looking at is what things do they abstain from and what things do they not abstain from, right?
How much time are they in the Bible in the morning? How much time
it's
do they
all,
spend
it's
in
all this kind
prayer?
of stuff.
Every time we do something like this, we create a measuring stick by which we can measure somebody, and we create the stick. And so the little ticks on it are ticks that we've placed on there and that we've designated as important. When the only thing that counts are these works done in faith on account of Christ. Period.
Yeah. And the other thing I
Amen.
think is huge about this, and we'll wrap it up, is that these good works are done for the sake of the neighbor.
Yes.
I think a lot of people think of good works as being before God, but and the reality is that I don't really want to hear a lot of good work talk that doesn't have the neighbor in view, as if God needs something from me. Like this is sort of absurd.
Yeah.
And so
as if I did something independently for no one but the heir, that God all of a sudden said, "Yeah, I really needed that."
Yeah. So this is the main thing: is that good works are meant to love and serve your fellow sinners. That's what that's what they're meant to do, and they're only important in that way, and that's why God cares about them, because He wants us loving and serving each other. He doesn't need them because they're just arbitrarily good things to do, and He's just obsessed with goodness.
This isn't a natural law proposition where some things are just designated as good for good's sake.
Right.
These are good in faith on account of Christ for neighbor.
Right.
And, without that, not the same thing.
All right. Well, there's good works. Well, this is as you see the progression happening, this is gonna dovetail nicely into law and gospel. They hinted at it, then they couldn't resist, and they jumped right into it next. We're gonna have to talk about these categories. So next video, we'll be talking about the law and the gospel and the distinction thereof.
Sounds good.